Good afternoon, everyone. Given our subject for this afternoon and given how much we talk about this foundation, the Greater Washington Community Foundation, being family, we thought we would open up with Sister Sledge. We are family. It's good to see y'all. I know some of y'all are party animals getting ready for Friday, Saturday. And so we figured we'd start y'all off with some music that would get you moving in your seats. Thank everyone for joining us. Looks like we have 23 folks who are on the line with us. Of course, we're organized today, convened today to talk about the latest book in our book group series, Solidarity Economics, Why Mutuality and Movement Matter. And we have one of the co-authors and a hero in the movement of mine, Dr. Manuel Pastor, with us. We're going to introduce him more fully in a second, but I want to turn it over to our indomitable, visionary, freedom fighting, and fundraising President and CEO Tonya Wellens, who's going to offer some words of welcome. Tonya.
Perfect. Thank you, Ronnie. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you all or see that you're present. I do want to invite you all, if you're able to, especially for the discussion portion of our book club, if you could turn your cameras on. I just think we'll have a better experience in being able to connect with each other if we're able to see each other, even though we can't be together in person.
And Tonya, are you spotlighted? Are you spotlighted?
I don't see I see the slide. I don't see myself as being spotlighted.
Can we spotlight Tonya, Tiara? If not, then
yes,
I'll go ahead.
She is.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, got it.
Anyway, it's very nice to have you all here. I was just checking in with Ronnie to see, we've been hosting our book club for a little over a year now. I think there are probably about 4 books that we've read together. Cast 1619 Project. We did the article series, or the article series with Michelle Singletary about what we get wrong about the racial wealth gap. And we're really excited to be able to be in a discussion with you today about solidarity economics and our economy. I'll come back to that very quickly. But the reason that we do this, the reason that we are so committed to reading and growing and learning as a community, is so that we can build our own capacity and stretch our own imaginations about what's possible for improving the quality of life, for really realizing and actualizing equity, racial equity in our community, by being in community with each other, where we're learning together. I had the pleasure of hearing Manuel Pastor today, a few months ago, through a CF Leads cohort project that our community foundation was a part of. And I'll tell you, there were so many things that stuck with me, but the one thing that stuck with me the most was a reframing of how we even talk about what we would normally say as the economy or the economy, a reframing it such that we're talking about our economy. When we talk about our economy and we personalize it, it really speaks to the opportunity that we all have to do something different, to shift the trajectory, and to change the course. So I really wanted to just offer that reflection on how significant and poignant it was to me and the work that we'll do. But we hope to build community, to increase public will, and of course, to continue to explore interventions to close the racial wealth gap as a community foundation. That is our ambition. Our new strategic plan has us really focused on economic mobility and pathways to closing the racial wealth gap in our region specifically. So with all of that, I want to say thank you for being our speaker today. Thank you all for showing up. And Ronnie, thank you for being a great champion for and choosing great works so that we can explore and grow together. Over to you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Tonya. And really, there is a book in one of the books that gets held as sacred by many, talking about a woman who arrived on the scene. She was Jewish, and she was in a moment where she had to make a decision about the fate and future of her nation, and she happened to be in proximity to power and privilege, and was able to use her influence to save her people. As she was wrestling with what she would do in the face of all that power, one of her advisors said, "Perhaps you have been raised up for a time such as this." And I just want to say, and I know I've said this in other spaces, the foundation is fortunate to have you as our leader right now. And this strategy we have around the racial wealth gap and economic mobility in Black and Latinx communities, that's the other piece, has been called the most audacious and bold vision for the Greater Washington Community Foundation in our 50-year history. And so thank you for being in the right place at the right time, and for being present and activating your leadership in a time such as this. So just real quickly, some background. In line with the book and the conversation we're going to have today, our strategy really points us to the kind of possibility of shared prosperity in our region. And we believe that achieving shared prosperity is an economic justice opportunity for us. And we contend with the strategy that by changing the prospects for how Black, Brown, Latinx people in particular, how our neighbors in those groups generate, sustain, and share wealth, by changing those prospects, we'll improve the quality of life for everyone that works in the region. So we are, I think, in line in many ways, Dr. Pastor, with a lot of the sentiment that you and your co-author raised in the book, and excited about being affirmed, but also challenged by what you have to offer in your volume. Just a couple other things. We know we've said this in previous iterations of the book group, but just want to keep this in front of you that as we are moving over the course of the next 10 years, this is a 10-year strategy, we'll be focused on what we call downstream, midstream, and upstream strategies to advance economic mobility and close the racial wealth gap. 3 big ones that we're working on right now as kind of our launch strategies are guaranteed income. We're one of the biggest investors already in the region around guaranteed income projects, which is cash in people's hands so they can just go do what they need to do to have good and productive lives. Baby bonds / children's savings accounts. You may have heard of them, and the version that you may have heard of is 529 plans. We're actually piloting these in schools, in one school in Montgomery County, one school in Prince George's County, and maybe some of the other jurisdictions soon to be determined. And then this last piece around community wealth building and strategic economic participation. How do we hardwire opportunities for ownership, wealth creation, and circulation in the neighborhoods that have been most marginalized by our political economic systems. This is happening in cities all over the country, all over the world even. Stuart Edelstein, who is on our Montgomery County Advisory Board, along with others, is active in this movement, along with Dr. Pastor and other folks in the room. So just wanted to telegraph kind of what the kind of strategy behind all of this. And as Tonya said, we're using the book group as a way to kind of socialize ourselves so that we begin to generate the imagination and the big ideas, and then activate the public will to take action to close the racial wealth gap and advance economic mobility. Just one more thing, if you haven't had a chance to do it, please, in the chat box, share your name, where you live or work in the region, and other books that you've read or that you would recommend for the group. Please do that. We do keep track of that. And we'd love to know who's in the room, what you're reading, and what you might recommend to your fellow family members who are on the call. All right. I think we got past everything. So now we want to do a little warm up. And I'm going to stop sharing here. And I probably, and Dr. Pastor, you'll see here in a second, I probably shouldn't say we're going to warm up, because one thing about this book group, we don't really need to warm up because we never really cool down, right? And so we stay pretty hot. This group does, and so but we do want to. I know that some of you have sent along some juicy questions that you want to bring into the conversation. But before we go there, we want to just get some sentiment from the room. Like, what are folks thinking about these big ideas related to the economy, what's happening in the country, things of the like. So I'm going to ask my colleague Tiara from our comms team to go ahead and share a poll that we're going to invite everyone to join in on here in a second. So can you go ahead and put the poll up, Tiara? There we go. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to ask everyone, all three questions are here on the poll, and so I'm going to read them out loud. So the first one is, I'm from another planet, and I come to Earth, and somehow or another, I find my way to the United States of America. And I'm trying to understand what's going on there. And someone says, you know what, we're a country that has the ethic, the belief that we're all in it together. And would you agree with that statement strongly, or strongly disagree, or somewhere in between, that America is a country where we are all in it together today? Like there's that overriding sentiment that we're all in it together. Do you strongly agree? Are you neutral on that, disagree, or strongly disagree? Second question, right? And Dr. Pastor and his co-author kind of talk about this in some of the early chapters of the book. We'll wrestle with this, I'm sure. Humans are primarily self-interested, selfish, self-centered creatures governed by the ethic of survival of the fittest. Do you strongly agree? Are you neutral on that, disagree, or strongly disagree? And then the third question has to do with our current economic arrangement and system. And Stu, you won't be surprised, Tony, you won't be surprised, given the systems change work we've been talking about in the economy, that this question comes up, right? Our current economic system is producing the outcomes we need for a healthy populace and planet. Strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly agree. So take a moment to answer those questions. Let me answer them too. Let's see. All right, Tiara, let's give that about another 15 seconds, and then can you, I've lost track. Can you show the results for these?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you guys see the results?
We cannot yet,
Okay.
if you're trying to put them up. Oh, there they go. Oh, they just flashed up and they went away. There they go. Okay, so America, we're all in it together. Does this sentiment prevail? And so we have 5% neutral, but the overwhelming majority of folks are saying that they either disagree or strongly disagree with that sentiment. And so that's saying something. We're not going to interpret the data right now. We're going to hold on to that. Next question. Humans are primarily self-interested, selfish, self-centered creatures governed by the ethic of survival of the fittest. So here we had more folks kind of agreeing and neutral. Oh, 45% saying that they disagree with that. Got it. Okay. Yep, that makes sense with this group. So let me make sure I got that right. So almost 55% of folks are saying that this statement is not true. You do not agree with this. that humans are self-centered. So the converse of that would be that we're more collective and collaborative and communal and so on and so forth. Okay, got it. Third one, our current economic system is producing the outcomes we need for a healthy populace and planet. So 100% of the room disagrees or strongly disagrees with that statement, that our economy is there you go, Tonya, our economy is producing the outcomes we need for a healthy populace and planet. And so given this response, and some of this was, we were hopeful, there's a lot for us to build on. And there is at least solidarity, a lot of solidarity of opinion here. And so thank you for that. Just before we jump into one of our main events, I'm going to introduce our speaker here in a second. Just want to see if anybody has any reactions or comments to the poll, what the strong sentiment that seems to be communicated by the results, or anything else we've said that either has challenged you, disturbed you, or affirmed you up to this point in our agenda. Anyone? Well, Dr. Pastor, maybe we're not as hot as we thought we were. So maybe we do need to warm up a little bit.
We're just
All
excited. Right. We're excited to have the author here with us.
So all right. So let me introduce. I'm going to read something very short, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about him. And Tony, if you want to jump in too. So, folks, I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. Manuel Pastor. He is a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity at the University of Southern California. He currently directs the Equity Research Institute at USC. Pastor is the Turpin-Gian Chair of Civil Society and Social Change at USC, and holds an economics PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. UMass Amherst, yes. Pastor's research has generally focused on issues of economic, environmental, and social conditions facing low-income urban communities and the social movement seeking to change those realities. I got a chance, I've actually intersected at least three times with Dr. Pastor. One was in an early book, Dr. Pastor, that you wrote with, I think it was Stuart Quo and Angela Glover Blackwell. And it was Uncommon Common Ground, I think is the title of it. And it like changed my whole trajectory around the possibility for solidarity amongst people of color and our allies who were working to create kind of a multi-racial democracy. And one of the things that stood out to me, and I don't know if you or Stuart or Angela said it, but this idea that racism and the way that racism particularly has showed up in the lives and reality of Black people is a defining rubric for how oppression happens in the country. So that book really changed my trajectory. And then, of course, before joining the foundation, I was over at the Center for Community Change. And Dr. Pastor was on the board there as we were launching a national Good Jobs campaign and organizing one of the largest immigrant rights networks in the country. And then, as Tonya said, most recently, a group of community foundations have been coming together around how do we lead with racial equity in a more impactful way. And Dr. Pastor came on to share some thoughts with us, particularly as it relates to how racial equity shows up in the economy. So you've influenced me more than you know, and I know you're super busy. Really grateful that you were able to carve some time out of your calendar to join us. And we've invited Dr. Pastor to really just have a conversation with us for the next 20 minutes about the book, some of the highlights from the book, and how he's just kind of seeing kind of the state of this opportunity related to the solidarity economy and solidarity economics in the country. And so Dr. Pastor, welcome to the foundation family. We have trustees, advisory board members, nonprofit partners, staff, underwater basket weavers, all the folks who are a part of our community, one way or another, they're represented on this call. And so, again, thank you for joining us, and I want to turn the mic over to you.
Great. Well, super glad to be with you, and pleasure to see you again, and Tanya as well. And I will try to aim my talk directly at the underwater basket weavers, because that's a constituency that definitely needs to be woven into the bigger tapestry of our movements for social justice. So what author can resist coming to talk about their book to a captive audience that apparently at least glanced at it? So let me do a little bit of talking about the book. And what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about how the book came to be, a little bit about some of the main ideas in the book, and then a little bit about sort of the political and organizing implications of it and what we've been trying to achieve with this book. You'll note, if you went to our website, solidarityeconomics.org, that not only can you download the book for free, but you can actually download a comic book version that can be used for popular education around these points. So let me say a little bit about how the book came to be. One thinks about books as perhaps bubbling up in the heads of authors or emerging from academic seminars. This one actually emerged from engagement with movement organizers in the state of California. In 2018, I published a book called State of Resistance, looking at the dramatic political transformation of California and highlighting the roles of social movement organizers, community power builders at changing the political economy of the state, but also noting how much more the state had to go. And in 2018, there was a gubernatorial campaign, and my co-author, Chris Benner, and I wanted to write a policy document to influence that campaign called From Resistance to Renewal, a 12-step program for the California economy. 12 steps, because we said that California needed to recover from its addiction to inequality, racism, and short-term thinking. And in the process of writing that program, we knew that the wisdom would come not from us, but from our community allies with whom we worked. And so we did 4 sort of focus groups, 15 or so people in each one around the state of leading movement builders. And one of the things that came out loud and clear to us, and something that was a little bit surprising in a way, was people saying that what they did not want was a laundry list of policy issues, that too many times, progressives, the left, folks working for social justice, they have an issue rather than a dream. They've got what do we want to do about housing? What do we want to do about the minimum wage? What do we want to do about reentry? What do we want to do about immigration? But don't necessarily have a whole narrative or story in which to fit in these different issue demands and think about them as part of a broader vision, particularly one rooted in economic possibilities. And so in many ways, this book actually came from engagement with grassroots organizers and their hope for a very different vision. And while we conceived of it before the COVID crisis is something that clearly made the book a thing that needed to occur. Because as you know, COVID really is the disease that revealed our fundamental illnesses as a society. That is, it was a virus, but really the underlying fragility, the underlying illness had to do with the racial wealth gap, such that some people had no cushion with which to survive detachment from work in order to stay healthy. It revealed the fragility of immigration status, because in the first CARES package, mixed status families, which by the way, are 18 to 19% of everyone who lives in my county, Los Angeles County, were essentially frozen out from federal aid. It revealed the digital divide and who went home from school to a house lacking a computer and high-speed internet and wound up suffering from lost learning. It revealed all of the challenges of a healthcare system that does not deliver for people of color. And so what COVID did was not just exacerbate those inequalities, but it revealed them starkly. And that coincided, of course, with the murder of George Floyd and the widespread recognition in the United States that racist policing was just the tip of a racist iceberg in terms of inequalities in education, the economy, and even in environmental exposures. So in this moment where people were asking for a bigger vision, in this moment where it was very clear that everything was at stake and all the inequalities had been revealed and put on the front pages of our newspapers. And I don't know about you, but watching newscasters on CNN for the first time have white supremacy just roll off their lips and understand that this was really part of the system in which we live, it created a need to understand that the language that was being used around the economy then, I say the economy very consciously now because I'm going to shift this, was a language about recovery. How are we going to take this COVID crisis and recover? And our question was, why would you want to recover to a normal that did not work for so many people? So we don't need a recovery, we need a reimagination and restructuring. And that's really the genesis of this book, Solidarity Economics. Now, a couple things about the book. For any of you who have ever written a book, one of the things that you have, I hope you have that experience if you haven't, but one of the things that's really great about writing a book is that you get a copy of it delivered while it's still sort of fresh off the press. And you get to look at this cover, which by the way, we had to fight for because we wanted to make sure that someone in a wheelchair was actually on the cover and was not being pushed around by someone else, but was an activist making change. And that's exactly what we got on the cover. So for us, disability was a very important issue to lift up. So it's really great. You get a book, you love the cover. And by the way, when they first arrive, they have almost like a new car smell. So it's like a really, really exciting thing. The frustrating thing is when you get the book, you realize you could have said the whole book in 3 sentences. So let me save you a little bit of time. Here are the 3 main sentences of the book that we hope that everyone takes away. The first is, and Tonya already pointed to it, is that we need to stop talking about the economy and always talk about our economy. When we say the economy, it makes it sound like a set of rules out there given by God or nature or the market that really can't be changed. And that's, instead of talking about our economy, a set of rules around property relations, market structures, legal structures that we actually came up with. And yes, we can alter in ways that would make our economy more equitable. And that simple language shift is actually quite fundamental. When you say our economy, we are in it. But it's also, when you think about it, if you look at the dialogue that takes place, you often hear, conservative or neoliberal economists talking about how raising the minimum wage is bad for the economy. That almost sounds reasonable. But raising the minimum wage is good for our economy because our economy has minimum wage workers, our brothers and sisters living in it, working hard, and they will benefit from an increase in the minimum wage. So that simple language shift is incredibly important. And it reminds us, and this is a point that you were making importantly, here, I'll tell you the way that I answered that question that you asked. I actually disagreed with the statement about self-interest only because I don't think we're primarily driven by self-interest. We are driven by both self-interest and mutuality. We are driven by doing what's good for us, our families, our neighborhoods, our tribes. But we are also we saw this in the time of COVID, driven by mutuality, the willingness to contribute at a soup kitchen, the willingness to wear a mask, not just to protect yourselves, but to protect others. You know, when there's a natural disaster, there are certainly price gougers who arrive, but there are also people who arrive simply to help people they have never met before, to deliver food, to deliver aid, to rescue people. We are motivated by self-interest and we are motivated by mutuality. And our problem is we've created a system that continues to reward self-interest rather than to reward mutuality. So, first point, talk about our economy, not the economy. Second point, and this is a point that we think is quite important, is to understand that in general, the language has been that equity should be thought of as a special interest issue. It's something that people of color lift up, that poor people lift up, and it's something that we should do for reasons of justice or inclusion or fairness. And believe me, I'm into justice, inclusion, and fairness. But there are many circumstances in which doing the equitable thing is actually going to grow our economy in a way that benefits most of us. When you de-incarcerate, you release not just people to live their lives, but new talent into our economy to be able to contribute. When you do an immigration reform that grants people secure legal status, the ability of people to start businesses, invest in homes, and be able to help their communities thrive is enhanced. When you stop the inequality that's baked into our educational system, such that largely Black and Latino low-income kids are being left behind, but really kept behind by that system, then you're creating more productivity in our economy moving forward. So I'm not saying that we give up the justice and inclusion argument. I'm saying that we need to own the equity may be good for our economy kind of argument. And, you know, there's research demonstrating this. Earlier books that I did with Chris Benner, Equity, Growth, and Community, took a look at metropolitan regions of the United States and found out that those metro regions that were more equal in terms of their income distribution, less residentially segregated, and less fragmented politically by multiple jurisdictions, were actually able to sustain job growth better over time. And these are results that have been echoed by research by the Federal Reserve and the International Monetary Fund, not well known as left-leaning organizations. So, you know, we need to think about this equity argument, and we need to understand that we have been brainwashed into thinking that equity is bad for the economy, our economy. So, for example, some of you have probably taken economics in undergraduate school, and you may recall that one of the first things you learn is about demand and supply in those curves. And one of the first things they teach you is that if you have the minimum wage, it's above where the market demand and supply would meet, and as a result, there'll be unemployment. A proposition for which there is almost no evidence and has been demonstrated over and over again is not actually true, but it gets taught because of this deep wiring in us that somehow equity and fairness will be bad for our economy. You know, think about it. If you exist in a workplace where people are hyper exploited, where people are mistreated, where people feel like they are not valued, that is not a workplace that's going to thrive in the long run. So if you wouldn't organize really your workplace that way, if you wouldn't organize your community that way, what sense does it make for us to be organizing our economy in a way that does not try to lift up everyone's talent? The third big point in the book is that while this is true, some people do benefit from the current state of affairs. And because of that, we need social movements that can change the constellation of power so that we can actually get a different set of economic prescriptions to guide us going forward. Now, we stress this role of power building because too often the discussions of our economy are about the economy, and they wind up being very technical rather than thinking about the ways in which ordinary people organizing together can help change those rules of the game. But we also stress this because we understand that there is something about movements that is very special. Just as markets make us selfish, that when you participate in markets, it rewards self-interest, it teaches you to pursue self-interest. Movements make us mutual. When you become part of a broad movement for social change, you wind up bridging to other communities. You wind up trying to find, Ronnie, the uncommon common ground, those places where you can come together, recognizing the persistent, defining, and fundamental nature of anti-Black racism in the United States as setting the train for everyone else's entry point into white supremacy in the United States, at the same time that you understand that the struggle of immigrants is different and needs a particular set of nuances to be able to find common ground. Movements teach us how to be mutual. They teach us how to bridge to other folks, how to take other people's interests into account. So movements are part of the vehicle for change. So just a couple of points to close, because I know that we really want to get to a conversation. First, I think that one of the things that we also lift up very strongly in the book, it's an anecdote that I will relay, is the role of racism in traditional neoliberal economics and the importance of challenging racism to solidarity economics. Now, you could think about this. If we are going to stress our economy, we know that racism gets in the way of us being able to see the hour. I know that you've read Heather McGhee's brilliant book, The Sum of Us. And what she is really trying to say there is that when we think about our social situation as some of us, rather than the sum of us, that what we do is we're unable to grasp the prosperity that would be in our mutual, our collective possibility. So we understand the role of racism in getting in the way of seeing our economy. We understand the role of racism in the ways in which it creates inequities that, again, don't allow us to see the role of why dealing with racial equity, well, it will really address the racial wealth gap and the disparities that Black and Latino families, households, individuals face, that it is something that will be of broad benefit to everyone. And of course, racism is anathema. It's toxic for social movement building. And we do a lot in the book about documenting the deep connection between neoliberal economics and the racial projects of white supremacy, for example, of a Ronald Reagan, whose embrace of neoliberal economics and tax cuts was so significant, and one of whose most important speeches during his 1980 campaign was delivered in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights leaders were infamously slain by the KKK, with Ronald Reagan talking about states' rights in that speech. Now, this is just a deep, deep connection. And one of the anecdotes we like to tell is that when we finished the first draft of the book, we delivered it to 2 audiences. One was a group of movement builders who'd been part of the early conversations, and another was our editor. The movement builders gave a lot of great feedback that we took full advantage of. Our editor liked the book, but he wrote back and said, I think you guys are talking way too much about race and racism in this draft of the book. So you know what we did? We talked about it more in the final draft. We said, if he's not getting how important this is, we must not be doing our jobs as authors about insisting about the way in which white supremacy and racism feed into a neoliberal economic paradigm that prevents us from moving toward solidarity economics. Now, just couple points to close. We talk a lot in the book in a couple of chapters about why this matters for the way we talk and the policy we do. We talk about how solidarity economics helps us get a glimpse of why the care economy is so important. And by the way, that's not just about a nice thing, but you know that if we extend our care economy and improve the conditions of workers in that economy, by the way, the care economy is growing faster and has more jobs than high tech. And when we grow the care economy, we liberate people who would otherwise be taking care of their elders or taking care of their children to be able to contribute in economic enterprises. We talk about housing and why a social housing approach would really make a difference. And we talk a little bit about what you were talking about with universal basic income and about how perhaps it would be better rephrased as a solidarity dividend. That is, that all of us contribute to the society in one way or another. And we deserve from the fact that as taxpayers, when you look at your iPhone, I have the newest one, highly recommend it, really good photos. But when you look at your iPhone, some of you might think, God, Steve Jobs is brilliant. But what you ought to really be thinking about is that 50% of the patents in this phone came from your tax dollars. All of the batteries, the internet access, all of that stuff you paid for, and you're not getting anything back from. When you think about all we put in to being able to contribute to the basic research and development that leads capitalist enterprises to be able to be successful. When you think about the fact that Facebook and Twitter and everyone else is benefiting from your data without you getting a return, you begin to realize that perhaps that we should be talking about this as a solidarity dividend and not as a universal basic income handout, which I know is not the way you all talk about it, Ronnie, but it's the way it winds up getting portrayed. You're getting payback for what you put in. Final thing, which I think hopes, excuse me, I hope moves us to a good conversation. And maybe a tough one. We are quite conscious in the book, and we lift up in the last chapter, which maybe nobody got to, some crucial examples. And we are quite conscious of one thing. We are very supportive of what people call the solidarity economy. And by the solidarity economy is meant worker co-ops, community land trusts, alternative enterprises, alternative forms of ownership. And we think that all of that is very important and that we should be designing legal systems, community systems, funding streams that help make all of that, and finance systems that help make all of that more possible. But we also understand that there are large firms, capitalist enterprises that exist, and that we are probably not shifting to a post-capitalist economy, big secret, sometime in the next 10 or 15 years. And unless we figure out how to engage with capital and that part of it that understands the possibility of high road economics, that understand, I'm lucky enough at the University of Southern California to have an endowed chair. And literally they give you a chair. You might see this chair right in back of me. That's the chair. Chair actually comes with money, and we support postdocs and things like that, but they literally give you a chair. And I one time asked pretty rich guy who endowed the chair how he made money. And he said, well, I treated my customers right. I treated my workers right. I treated my suppliers right. And it pretty much all worked out. And we know that you could either be the low road that Walmart has taken, particularly in the past, or you could be the high road that Costco seems to emulate. You can live off worker exploitation, or you can live off lifting up talents. You can try to drive down wages, or you can live with and help support a minimum wage. And we know that there are some businesses that need to be moved in that column of being high road. So one of the things that we tried to be very conscious in this book, and I think it's worthy of debate, is to say, look, if you want to deal with the climate crisis, we're not going to do that. We need to do that in the next 10 to 20 years. And we're not going to do that without the constellations of economic power that currently exist. So how do we marginalize the worst actors? How do we engage with the best actors? How do we combine alternative forms of ownership with worker organizing and empowerment, with government regulation to make sure that exploitation isn't possible and that our environment is protected, along with strategies to both have consumers reward the best businesses and for activists and policymakers and others to engage with the best businesses to craft where we need to go over the next 10 to 15 years. So we are quite conscious that this is a book for a transition. Others can talk about what that endpoint looks like. I'm 66 years old. I kind of want to make sure we don't bake the planet in the next 10 to 15 years. And let me just open it up for conversation. I'm just so excited to be with you all.
Woo!
Where have you been all my life? You just made my whole year. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's not forget the lithium mines that are the
right.
indigenous lands that are being destroyed for the lithium, so we can have our electric cars and our cell phones, and the indigenous people.
Uh-oh, did we lose Savannah?
You did. Your mic went
Uh-oh.
off. There you go.
Tiara, can you take Dr. Pastor off of Spotlight so we can see everybody? So Dr. Pastor, first of all, thank you for that exposition. And if y'all didn't make it through the whole book, Dr. Pastor just laid it down on you. He said it was a 3-point, notice his last name is Pastor, right? Okay, so Pastor, but Pastor. So he said it was a 3-point sermon. It was like an 8-point sermon. So I hope you, with data, by the way. So I hope you got all of that. So I have a dilemma.
That's the Baptist in me. We just keep preaching.
That's right. So yeah, Tim Warner in the middle is preaching too. He loves it. So this is the hard part of when we come together. We have 90 minutes. And I've been sending some of you messages in the chat box trying to get your opinion on this. Dr. Pastor, this is where we typically pivot to small groups. And we probably should. Danielle, I'm looking at you too, looking for some advice. But like, there was so much richness there. I'm wondering, should we stay in plenary and let's just have a conversation if folks want to ask you questions, things of the like. So I'm seeing some head nods. Let's stay. Okay, got it. So
Ronnie, I think you may remember I need to jump off a little early too, so maybe that makes sense for that reason as well.
Perfect. Excellent. So let's just thank you, Renee. Perfect. Let's just stay in plenary and let's just open it up for questions. Silvana, your hand, is she still on? Her hand was up earlier. Wanted to give her an opportunity to ask a question. If not, I'll step back and just allow folks to jump in and ask questions of Dr. Pastor or each other.
I just want to, I thought it was fabulous. Your comments were fabulous and right on. And you were also quite nuanced in understanding that we're in a transitional state. And power is really not lodged very much in the places that we need it to be able to move forward. But the one thing you didn't talk about, which I think is underlying a lot of our current problems, is fear. Fear of, it leads to tribalism, it leads to protection. There may be racism included in that, but fear is universal. I mean, it's universal in the white community, universal in the Asian community, universal in the Black and Hispanic community, and there's lots of communities, there's lots of ours here. So I'm trying to understand how we move in this direction that you want to move in with two questions. One is dealing with the issue of fear, which leads to all kinds of not very good behaviors. And then who is the our that we're talking about?
And
Good.
Stu, could you introduce yourself real quick as your
Stu Edelstein, retired, University of Maryland, and involved in the community collaborative for many, many years, helped to start it actually. The Democracy Collaborative helped to start it many years ago with Gar Alperovitz.
Yeah, it's a great organization. So I think that's a two good points. So on fear, there's a lot of sources of fear. There's a lot of economic anxiety. That is, there's a lot of worry that's widespread between and among different communities about whether or not economic changes are going to leave folks and their kids behind, about how distant. I teach a course called Los Angeles and the American Dream. I guess my students come in really believing in it, and then they walk away realizing how distant it actually is from them. So there's a lot of that kind of a fear. I think, though, Stuart, there's a difference between fear of what the world might deliver and fear of each other. And it is the fear of each other which is paralyzing about our ability to tackle some of these broader issues. I mean, I think there's fear about our economy. There's definitely fear about, particularly for young folks, about the climate crisis and what the world will look like for them going forward. I think there's fears right now of political violence because it seems so present and possible, and the passions are so severe. I do think that what is particularly toxic, and it gets to your second point, is the fear of each other and the ways in which we are separated ethnically by race, which we often talk about. But I think we spend less time thinking about class and the way in which we are also separated by class. If you look, for example, at the patterns of residential segregation in the United States, and there's a variety of different measures that sociologists use, the patterns of racial segregation between Black and white Americans have basically been very similar for about the last 20 years. Latinos are a little bit more segregated than they were. The big shift in terms of segregation is by class. Poor people are much more likely to live with poor people than ever before. Affluent people more likely to live with affluent people. And we often look at this from the point of view of what does it mean when poor people live with other poor people in terms of access to jobs, to networks, to education, to environmental conditions, et cetera. We forget the toxicity of affluent people living with other affluent people and patting themselves on the back about how much they deserve it and being able to tell themselves stories about how much merit was involved in getting there. So that's another kind of separation that I think is really, really critical. How do we get to our? I think we get to the our by organizing, by movement building, by bringing communities together. And I think that we also need to be not too romantic about that. There is a tendency to think that if we are talking about creating the hour, that literally everyone needs to be part of it. There are many things that my co-author, Angela Glover Blackwell, for the book Uncommon Common Ground has said that I quote, and this is one. She reminded me, and I think during the writing of the book or when we were out giving talks about it, that during the civil rights struggle, we never brought Bull Connors, that famous Birmingham sheriff who hosed down children protesters, onto our side. But a lot of other people did. So I think we need to figure out who we are bringing onto our side and who it makes sense to leave to one side and marginalize. That is, I don't want to be romantic about the hour. I think it needs to be big enough to win, and it has to be much more than 50 plus 1. And it needs to really stretch into a broad consensus. But in doing that, and this is a lesson I think is really critical, it's really the topic of the book, and sorry for such a long answer. There is a tendency for us often politically to believe that if we are going to broaden the circle, that we need to move to the middle. And what I would suggest is that what we need to do instead is to move the middle. When folks thought about pushing for marriage equality, that was moving the middle. When the Dreamers lifted up the situation of undocumented youth, they moved the middle. On the question of the minimum wage, and you look at how well that does in elections throughout the country, nobody moved to the middle. They moved the middle with a great rhetoric and struggle around the fight for 15. And what this book is an attempt to do, and this bigger project, Solidarity Economics, is to move the middle, to give us a language that doesn't make it sound like a laundry list of leftist shit that nobody really pays attention to, but sounds instead like common sense. It is our economy. You do know that when people act out of mutuality, you do know that if you treat people more decently, that we all do better. You do know that the way change happens is by people getting together to create movements and create change. You do know all this instinctually. So rather than to appeal to the obscure rants that people might have gotten in an upper division graduate course on Marxist economics, why don't we try to figure out a language that actually moves the middle?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My goodness, my goodness. Timothy Warner, I think we have you on deck next. And if you have a question, drop your name in the chat box and I'll get you in the queue. Tim, go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, and thank you, Dr. Pastor, for such an intriguing presentation and for a great book. I'm pastor of a small church in Gaithersburg, Maryland, where for 150 years here in this community, we've got a history of African-American economic deprivation and political subjugation. And now, which eventually resulted in the raising of our community during urban renewal. And following an intentional deposition of much of Montgomery County's poverty through the 70s and 80s, we now have mostly new Americans, mostly from Central America here, in residence as well. Our little church now finds itself with an opportunity to build a new community, literally 500 units of housing. We'll get the bricks and mortar done. I worked very hard to make sure that's going to happen. But my deep question is twofold. How do we build a community that has an ethic of economic solidarity in it? And what are the modalities that we can build into the DNA of the new community to fight against this superstructure that presses down on precisely what you've been talking about?
Thank you, Reverend Warner. I love that question, partly because it allows me to talk about the other book that came out last year. Two books in 1 year. It sounds like I'm remarkably productive, but it's actually just bad planning. I probably should have had them stacked for different years. But the other book, which I think might be quite relevant to you, is a book called South Central Dreams, Finding Home and Building Community in South LA. And what it looks at is the big demographic transformation of South LA from being about 80% African-American in 1970 to being about 2/3 Latino today, much of that change occurring in the late 80s and early 1990s. And when that change first occurred, there were conflicts and tensions, and I'm not saying there still aren't some, as was revealed by the racist statements of 4 Latino civic leaders in Los Angeles, for those of you who've been following this. But one of the things that's somewhat interesting is, and more than interesting, is how over time those tensions and conflicts instead became Black-brown organizing around a common agenda of place identity and place creation. And it is, wonderful coda to that the founder of Community Coalition, rooted in South LA, rooted since its first steps in Black-Brown solidarity, the co-founder of that group, Karen Bass, will now step in on Monday as the mayor of our city because of the many skills she already had, but the way in which her saw of coalition building was sharpened by doing this work, bringing together Black and Latino communities in South LA. So one of the things I will say just a couple of things about this that may be useful. First is the need to have very real conversations in the community about what people are actually feeling. We often think the way that we can find our way to solidarity is to just stress our commonality rather than to explore the ways in which we are ignorant of one another. I still remember, it's one of my fonder memories with Karen. She was, I think at that point, Congresswoman, she may have still been an assembly leader, but we were both asked to lead a session in South LA on the Black-Brown history of South LA and the nature of coalition building. And I remember we gave a great, talk about the history and deindustrialization and crack cocaine and gang warfare and wars in Central America and economic crisis in Mexico and people coming and all this kind of stuff. And at the end, one of the first questions asked was by a young Black man who said, well, I used to like Mexicans. I just don't like these new Mexicans, by which he meant Central Americans. And another, and actually an older Black gentleman saying, the thing is these Latino guys really want to work. These young Black guys don't want to work. And that sounds like horrible stuff for people to say, but it's what they were actually thinking. And creating a conversation where people can actually say what they were thinking, the myths that they had, and helping to dispel those, helping to challenge the anti-Black racism, colorism that exists within the Latino community. People bring it from Latin America, but it's not like arriving in the United States is destined to beat it out of you. It's only there to reinforce it. So, one of the things I would really encourage Reverend Warner, and I'm sure you're doing it, is to have deep community conversations that allow the honesty of what people are feeling to come out. Because what came out of that conversation was then a common campaign to get the city of Los Angeles to retrofit its buildings to deal with the climate crisis and to guarantee jobs for Black and Latino young people from our neighborhoods. So tough conversations, I think, are really a key part of it. And then I think helping to understand, and I think this something that just went into the chat is probably helpful, how it is that people develop spatial identity as well as racial identity. So, one of the things, just one last anecdote here, I teach at USC, and years ago when I would teach my course on LA and I would ask, how many of you from South LA, the hands that would go up were almost all Black. Now, when I ask that question, the hands that go up are almost all Latino. But they're the same kids. They have the same pride of place. They have the same sense of resilience. They have the same commitment to not just beating the odds, but changing the odds for everyone around them. Because they've been forged in a particular place. They found home and they built community, which is what our book is about. And so I would encourage helping people who are newcomers understand the history of the place, understand the importance of that, understand that the terrain of inequality and deprivation that they might face right now has been set by anti-Black racism. And so you got to struggle against that. I mean, it's not like the Latina kids are going to do better off when the terrain has been set so starkly and unequally by anti-Black racism. It's got geographic consequences. So I think stressing all that's very important. That book, by the way, you can get a lot of information about by going to our website for it, southcentraldreams.com. You can't download the book for free. But there's one great thing about this book, which is it's the only book, our Solidarity Economics is the only academic book I know that's come with a comic book. South Central Dreams is the only academic book I know that comes with its own rap video. And it's a great rap video. It was done by one of the researchers. They were sharing it with a rapper, and the person got interested and made a rap video about the book. But it's a great thing. But the only frustrating thing about it is that in 1 minute and 45 seconds, he says pretty much what it took us 300 pages to say. So I encourage looking at the video, maybe glancing at the book.
Thank you very much.
Wow. I just put in the chat box, why am I over here about to cry? This is just so amazing. We've been getting a lot of male voice in this conversation. And Sean, I was going to bring you up, but I see Silvana has her hand up. So we probably have time for maybe one. I'm going to have both of you ask your question. And then we'll have Dr. Pastor, because he has to jump off a little early. Have Dr. Pastor respond. So Silvana, you go, Sean, you go, and then Dr. Pastor, I'll offer kind of like a capstone question if we can work it out. Go ahead, Silvana. You're on mute. We're 2 years in, by the way. If there's that little microphone at the bottom, that's the mute button.
I think it's her phone mic, Silvana.
Oh, okay. Well, that's because she has the flip phone. Didn't you just hear Dr. Pastor say they get the new one? Silvana and I mess with each other. We can't hear you, Silvana. Put it in the chat box. Sean?
Yeah, I'll go ahead while she's
Silvana, just if you might want to log off and log back on, and then maybe that'll work while Sean asks his question.
Yeah, so one thing I really liked about the book is that you focused a lot on the kind of positive aspects, like pointing out, basically an affirmative plan and the like groups that are already doing this work and examples to follow. But because of that, there was one thing that I'd like to learn more about that I didn't really find in the book, which is about like elite capture of private philanthropy and kind of the almost like the monopolization of philanthropy and just some things that I've seen recently about private foundations accumulating wealth but not actually giving out the funds, or only giving out the minimum distribution each year, and also the like donor advised funds, which don't have a minimum distribution and can be kind of an interminable source of capital accumulation while still giving tax benefits for wealthy donors. And so I was just wondering, kind of those things that I've seen about philanthropy have suggested to me that we're almost moving away from a solidarity economy rather than towards one in the sector. And I was wondering, besides addressing like tax laws, is there something else we can do to encourage the sector to move towards a solidarity economy, or reverse those trends that we're seeing fewer individual donors and more ultra wealthy donors?
So I was going to ask a kind of like a capstone closing question, but it seems like Sean has done a pretty good job of that. And you're probably going to need all the time to respond to that. So I don't know if Silvana jumped back on.
Silvana's on. Let's see if she can.
Okay. No.
It's funny because she was able to say something earlier.
Yeah. Drop it in the chat box, Silvana. Okay, it looks like she's typing.
Great. Well, I'll deal with this question. I think you are pointing to something quite important, and I think it's elite capture of philanthropy, but of course, there's elite capture of so much else too. Our governments, so many of our corporations, et cetera. And so I think it's a crucial issue. I think in terms of philanthropy, that there are a couple of different moves. One, I do think is about the trying to get the investments to go more in this direction of solidarity economy. The other thing, which I know I've worked on quite a bit with different philanthropies, is trying to get people to invest in more fundamental power building at a community and movement level. And I think that that's very crucial. You know, I often used to talk about how foundations thought about their work, and if they should think about their work in terms of these three dimensions of projects, policy, and power. That projects demonstrate what's possible, policy makes the possible standard operating procedure, but it's power that actually moves policy. And so, you know, we may wind up investing in a demonstration project around universal basic income, hoping that it may wind up having a policy impact, but it's not going to have a policy impact unless there's a power strategy, unless there's investment in community organizing, in labor groups, and you name it, to shift the balance of political power to make that happen. And so there's been a tendency for folks to think about community organizing and power, movement efforts as being instrumental to policy change, rather than thinking about them as being fundamental to community change. That is, that what you're doing when you're investing in organizing and movements is you're trying to create efficacious individuals in effective communities who can change the conditions of their lives, and it doesn't depend on the particular issue. So if you're investing in community organizing because you want to move a housing policy, that's not an approach I'd recommend. I would recommend investing in community organizing and community capacity and power building so people can choose the issues that make the most difference to their lives, and they can pivot from issue to issue in ways that I think make sense. And I will just, that actually gets to, Sean, why not so much of that is actually in the book, and it ties into Silvana's question. She said that she appreciates the point on history and storytelling and about these films about uprisings and empowerment, etc. One of the things that we're quite conscious of is that if we want people to come to our side, we need to demonstrate that we think we can win. You know, telling people the world is terrible, we've been oppressed, we continue to be oppressed, we're likely to continue to be oppressed, we're probably fucked, is not empowering. And having been part of a city that burned itself down in 1992, part of a state that was convulsed with racist reaction in the 1990s with Prop 187, 3 strikes laws, elimination of affirmative action, elimination of bilingual education, having been witness to the patient community organizing and power building that's taken place over the last 30 or so years, with the idea being that we needed to demonstrate that we could be powerful, we could win, we could make a difference in people's lives. That's been kind of a key part of my tone. Now, it's probably just my nature as a person. I often say that I'm the kind of person who could walk into a room full of manure and say, wow, there must have been a pony here just recently. But I have also been on an arc of change in which we've combined impatience around injustice with patience around strategy. And I think you bring people to your side with talking about what the possibilities are. So I think it's absolutely crucial to lift up the critique that Sean is lifting up. And I think there's a place for it. There's a role for it. It's got a important set of considerations and realities that need to be part of our thinking. And we also need to lift up when it is that we're able to convince our colleagues in the philanthropic community to actually invest in power building and movements and social change, and point out just how well that works in order to bring more people to that side. So I said I had to leave at 10:20, it's 10:19.
My goodness. Doctor, can we give Dr. Pastor a round of applause and joyful faces on the screen? We say this after every book group, but I can emphatically say it after this one. This was the best ever. We'll probably say it after the next one too, but you know how this works. Thank you so much, Dr. Pastor. We hope that this is the evolution of a conversation and engagement with you. I know that DC is no kind of foreign place to you. You're here a lot. You've spoken directly to philanthropy and other kind of sector leaders. And as we're pursuing our 10-year strategy, we certainly want to stay connected with you. Thank you for being gracious with your time and your wisdom, my friend.
Thank you very much. Share the book with friends. It's free.
Yeah, we will. Tonya, any final words for Dr. Pastor?
Huge thank you. Again, thanks for everyone for showing up and participating in this conversation and our learning together. Thanks, Dr. Pastor.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to ask everyone just to stick around for just a few more minutes. Wow. 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 That's all I could say is wow. The question that I wanted to ask him, but I'm going to offer it to, as we close, to our family here. A number of folks had to jump off. In the book, early on in the book, Pastor and Benner say that we are living in a transformational moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about y'all, but it maybe every generation can say that. But I don't know, just the way things have come together in this present age, it does feel like we're in a make or break moment. And we as a community foundation partner and family, and each one of you as partners doing your work in community, we just have an amazing opportunity and obligation in front of us. And so thank y'all for making it this far on the journey with us around this new strategy to close the racial wealth gap, advance economic mobility in Black and Latinx neighborhoods. And you can see how our strategy and how we're positioned lines up with many of the tenets that Dr. Pastor and Chris Benner are raising in the book. And so we're affirmed, but also we should be challenged, because I heard him say that I think it was Reverend Warner asked this question about like, how do we, or maybe it was Stu, like who's the hour and how do we bring folks together? So there's plenty of work to do. But one of the ways that I heard him say the hour begins to emerge and strengthen is by us having tough and uncomfortable conversations. Mm-hmm. And for us to create the kinds of spaces for us to say the things that we're thinking, that we've been socialized to believe, so that we can actually create the vision. We can challenge each other, Tim, support each other, and hold each other accountable as we try to build this new future. And so Tonya has really given us license to do that, right? And I hope that we can invite more of our trustees, more of our advisory board members, more of our grantee partners, more folks out there who are on the fringe, experiencing the sharpest kind of trauma from our system of economy and politics. How do we build the kind of tent where we can have those tough conversations and build the future? So that's our work. We scratched at it again here today. We're going to continue to do this. We had some slides, but I don't need to show them to you. Our next book group is going to be in March. We're going to be reading Jessica Gordon Nemhart's Collective Courage, which is it is in a similar vein of this book. It's talking about the history of cooperative economics in Black communities and all over, and particularly in DC. And so want to invite y'all to do that. We're also, just in case you see it, Melon, she's kind of special assistant to Tonya, has been talking with William Darity and Kirsten Mullen, who wrote the book From Here to Equality on reparations. If they end up showing up saying that X date is the best date for us to talk to your family, we may actually pivot, because that's such a big conversation. It's come up 100 times as we have been putting our strategy together and launching it. And so if they give us a date that works better, we may actually move them into the next slot. So stay tuned for that.
Ronnie, just a couple of things, if it's all right, before we close all the way. I just want to make sure that we, if there are any other people who want to say anything before we.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we close, we heard from Dr. Pastor, but if there's anybody else who wants to reflect or offer anything, Lanta, I'm really picking up in your cue around this face-to-face, race-to-race, place-to-place, because that was my question. How do we move, I think eventually from the safety of Zoom to place-to-place, race-to-race, because that is more of what we aspire for. We want to be, in real communities so that we can have real conversations. And even there are some confines, I think, with Zoom. You get to either have your camera off or you're on mute and you're listening and you're processing, right? And we're doing it sometimes in group. It doesn't always translate to the sidebar conversation that you get to have with someone when you're in community. So I just want to, again, I'm going to pause for 15 seconds to see if anybody else has anything they want to say or express. And then I have one more example I wanted to share before we wrap up. Anybody want to say anything?
I don't want to say anything. I want to ask a question. He used, Professor Pastor used a phrase, and I want to make sure I got it correctly. He said the high road business or the high road economy or the high road something. I just wanted to know if anyone caught those sequencing of words. So I just know that I'm using exactly what he said. That's it.
It's high road economics. That's what I remember. High road economics.
Yep. Leslie Haroon from Democracy Collaborative is giving us a thumbs up. Yep.
Yeah. Leslie, do you want to say anything? I know that this book speaks is central to a lot of the work of the Democracy Collaborative. Do you want to say anything, offer anything, any reflections?
Sure. Yeah, no, it definitely reflects our work, and it was really, I loved it. I was very inspired, and it really makes me, one of the things that we've been grappling with is how do we move away from, our sort of community focus, not that we want to move away from it, but what's the language that we use that lifts it out of all of those policies and activities and land and housing and all the other things and energy and healthcare. How do we create that big vision that really helps us move all of our work forward? So it was really helpful for me in thinking about that.
Yeah, I appreciated that. It's like, can we get away from the issue sometimes, the specific issue, and just get to a place where we're able to have meaningful relationships and purposeful opportunities for, to build and tease out the strategy, which, in our fast-paced lives, we want to come with the agenda set. And push through it rather than building the agenda. Lanta, please, together.
I guess you probably heard, many of you have heard it from me before, but the industry that I work in, the financial services, that industry where the financial markets, the economy, GDP, all of those things are so central. I think a lot of work is going to need to be done in that space, because that type of language, is what has driven a lot of these decisions and the, a lot of proposals that we've already seen come forth. And he talked about in the book, when you talk about, the minimum wage is gonna be bad for the economy, that's really the financial markets. And then, the wealth is driven by the people in the financial market. Most wealthy people are big players in the financial market, so they have a lot to lose potentially, at least perception wise, when you start talking about how you frame that and whether their wealth is going to be at risk. I don't know what the answer is for how we address it, but I think it is something that is going to need to be a part of this. And I think it relates a little bit to the question that Sean, I believe, had asked about, some of the philanthropy, right? You amass all of this wealth and then you give some of it away because of the tax break for a lot of the larger endowments, particularly on the West Coast. A lot of that is for the tax benefits of donating money to large amounts of money or businesses to philanthropic efforts.
Yeah, and Sean, let me tell you, thanks, Lanta. That's not the case for the Greater Washington Community Foundation. We're on track to disperse upwards of $80 million this year. Our fund holders are not sitting on their gifts to their funds. Actually, we have quite the opposite challenge, which is why we're focused on some endowment building so that we can continue to sustain our work ongoing. But I think your point is absolutely the right one, Lanta, because in the conversations we just had with the financial advisory community, we're telling them this, we're sharing the same message with them about our agenda around economic mobility and closing the racial wealth gap for this very same reason, because of their access to both high net worth individuals and companies, so that we're able to begin to shift so much of this work. And we learned this, and Silvana knows it well. It's really around changing hearts and minds. First is why we're doing this book group in the first place, so that we can begin to figure out, okay, and what else is it that we need to do so that we're creating a more equitable, kind of region, society where we can all enjoy the wealth of it. It's deep community work that starts here. It doesn't end here. It doesn't end in conversation. It ends with our action. I did appreciate, again, I know we're running over, the notion that this is a transition period. And I want to say that to some of our interventions around the racial wealth gap, I don't think we know enough to suggest that these are end game solutions, but these are intermediary interventions that help us to support people who are struggling the most differently, by putting more resources directly in their hands right now, rather than wait, 5 more years for the wage to increase again. Like, we have to do some things now to mitigate the challenges that people are experiencing right now while we build this new reimagined economy that works better for everyone. So I'm excited. It is affirming. It affirms where we're going. And it affirms the importance of being in community and in relationship with all of you. So I just want to say thank you again for showing up, some of you many times over, and for our team for doing the hard work of making progress as we find our way into our new strategic vision to close the racial wealth gap in the Greater Washington region. Thank you all very much. Ronnie, thank you for your leadership. I really appreciate it.
Thank y'all, family, and thank you, Tonya, for helping to allowing us to create the space. Family, we will be in touch with you. Look out for a survey, as we always do after this. We want to get your feedback. And everybody look at Jonathan Schroeder. Jonathan, put your hand in the air like you just don't care, some folks in the yard. So we've had like 5 or 6 of these now. We're going to be putting together a little montage of kind of greatest hits, the kinds of the comments and quotes and things of the like from our time together over the last year, just as a way to expand the tent, have tougher conversations, and of course, build public will and imagination around these issues. So again, thank y'all so much for showing up so beautifully and powerfully. And we'll be in touch soon. Have a great weekend.